Hello and welcome to the new channel. Today, I present to you the third part of the story, Pandora and the Eternal War. If you like this story, please let me know with a subscription. I hope you enjoy listening to the story as much as I enjoyed making it. So, without further ado, I'll get right into the story.
Leon finished his meal, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and stretched with a contented sigh. "That was good," he said, placing his utensils aside. Pandora nodded absent-mindedly, her mind still lingering on the stories about superpowers and the mysterious stellar class they had just discussed. After they paid, Pandora and Leon stood up and left the cozy restaurant. They stepped out onto the wide streets of Metropolis Alpha, bathed in the soft, bluish light emanating from the second sun. The city was alive, with people bustling about, and the towering skyscrapers casting long shadows over the streets. As they walked, Pandora's gaze fell on a building that stood out from the rest. It was flat and elegant, reflecting the light of the blue sun on its glass walls. In large, golden letters, a sign hung above the entrance. Pandora stopped and pointed toward the impressive structure. "What's that over there?" she asked curiously. Leon followed her gaze and smiled. "That's the Metacenter," he explained. "That's where the Meta Cup takes place every year. It's a massive event where heroes from all over come together to compete in duels and other disciplines. The whole thing is about demonstrating their strength, and it always draws the attention of the big guilds and the Heroes Association. Every year, new talents emerge from there." Pandora was impressed. "That must be one of the safest places in the world when the Meta Cup happens," she said, staring at the grand building. Leon nodded. "Absolutely. While the Meta Cup isn't happening right now, it'll start in 2 months. Preparations are already underway." Pandora was surprised. "It takes that long to prepare?" "Yeah," Leon said. "It's a very complex festival. It requires an enormous amount of resources, and many superheroes help with the preparations. It's a huge organizational effort. But right now, things are just starting." Pandora was amazed by the scale of the event and the preparations it required. Suddenly, a murmur spread through the streets. She turned around and saw people had stopped in their tracks, staring at a large holographic display that had materialized on the side of a silver skyscraper. On the display, a news anchor appeared, speaking with a tone of urgent concern. "We have a breaking news update in our daily broadcast. The traitor Elias Green has been located. He is currently engaged in combat with several S-rank heroes in an E-rank chaos zone, approximately 100 kilometers north of here." A murmur rippled through the crowd as the anchor continued. "The first hero team sent to investigate anomalies in the chaos zone failed to return 2 hours ago. A second team was deployed and discovered a treehouse believed to be Elias Green's hideout. It is suspected that he was living there with another person. The first team was eliminated when they attempted to enter the chaos zone." Pandora felt her stomach tighten as she listened to the anchor's words. Her heart pounded in her chest, and a cold wave of fear washed over her. The anomalies they were describing, the rapid loss of chaos energy in the zone, were her fault. Her powers had caused the chaos zone to begin dissolving, and now that had drawn the attention of the Heroes Association. Pandora froze, her thoughts spinning. Guilt surged through her as she realized that her actions had inadvertently put her parents in danger. The discovery of the treehouse and the elimination of the heroes meant that Elias and her family were now in the crosshairs of the heroes. Panic gripped her as she tried to think clearly. Leon noticed Pandora's sudden unease. "Are you all right?" he asked, concerned. Pandora swallowed hard and slowly nodded, even though her mind was filled with fear and doubt. "Yeah, it's just a lot to take in," she said quietly, though her thoughts were still on the news. She knew she had to be careful. If anyone found out she was connected to the chaos anomalies, she could become a target herself. Tears welled up in Pandora's eyes as the weight of everything crashed down on her. Her hands trembled, and she fought to keep herself composed, but the overwhelming guilt and fear were too much to contain. Leon noticed the shift in her, saw the tears, and without hesitation, he leaned closer to her, his voice soft and reassuring. "Hey," he whispered, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "It's going to be okay. Don't worry. I won't let anything happen to you. I'm not someone who goes down easily." His words were steady, full of confidence, and despite the storm inside her, Pandora found some comfort in his presence. Around them, people were still engrossed in the news broadcast, oblivious to her inner turmoil. Leon, sensing that she needed space, subtly guided her away from the crowd, weaving through narrow streets and dimly lit alleys. As they moved further from the busy streets, Leon kept his voice low, soothing. "Everything's going to be all right," he repeated, leading her into a shadowed, secluded part of the city. He stopped and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. Pandora couldn't respond, her emotions swirling too intensely within her. Suddenly, Leon stamped his foot on the ground, and beneath them, a sheet of ice formed. Pandora barely registered what was happening as Leon created a platform of ice that lifted them slowly upwards, higher and higher, until they reached the rooftop of a nearby building. The ice beneath them crumbled, transforming into a soft pile of snow that settled at the base of the roof. Now they were isolated, away from the prying eyes of the people below. From this vantage point, the large holographic display could still be seen, the news anchor's voice echoing faintly in the distance. Pandora's vision blurred as tears flowed freely. She couldn't control it anymore. Leon, once again, placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Pandora, you don't have to carry this alone. Everything will be fine." But she couldn't hear him. Not really. Her mind was somewhere else, lost in the tempest of her emotions. She felt a surge inside her, an overwhelming wave of energy, building with every breath. The chaos within her stirred, growing stronger with each passing second. It was as though her inner darkness, the swirling mass of purple and black flames, had finally awakened. In the depths of her heart, she saw it clearly, a manifestation of her power. The chaos, wild and untamed, was no longer hidden in the shadows of her mind. A bright, violet light burned within her, and from that light, a black and purple sun emerged, hanging in a vast, star-filled void. Pandora could feel her emotions being consumed, swallowed whole by the chaos. Her sorrow, her despair, they were being devoured, and in their place, there was nothing. She felt numb, distant, as though she had been emptied of feeling. Yet, she could think clearly, as if the chaos had burned away the haze of her sadness, leaving behind only cold, logical thought. Every negative emotion was sucked into the pull of the black sun in her heart, but it didn't feel wrong or painful. It was natural, like it was something that had always been there, waiting for the right moment. When Pandora opened her eyes, she saw that the violet-black flames weren't just in her mind anymore. They surrounded her, visible for the first time, the raw manifestation of chaos energy. Leon took a step back, his eyes wide in shock, but she barely registered his reaction. It was as if she were watching the scene unfold from a distance, detached from the reality in front of her. Everything felt like a dream, surreal, almost like a movie she was watching but couldn't interact with. Leon's voice cut through the haze of chaos that swirled around Pandora. "Pandora, can you hear me?" he called out, his tone filled with concern. His voice was clear now, breaking through the distant, dreamlike sensation that had consumed her. She looked up at him, her vision still clouded by the violent, flickering energy that surrounded her. "Pandora, what's happening?" Leon asked, stepping closer. His eyes were wide, clearly confused by what he was seeing, but his voice remained steady. "Whatever this is, whatever you're doing, you need to control it. I'm here for you, but you've got to rein it in." Pandora blinked, her eyes stinging sharply. For a moment, she didn't understand why, but then something incredible happened. Her gaze sharpened, and she saw beyond Leon's physical appearance, straight into his chest. A bright, cold sphere of energy flickered in his chest, surrounded by faint, intricate lines. It felt like ice, a sharp, clear blue power that matched the calmness of his demeanor but hinted at the raw strength within him. She realized in shock, she was seeing his ability. For a moment, her mind raced. "How am I seeing this?" she thought, her breath catching in her throat. But then, the sensation of the chaos energy burning around her brought her back to reality. With great effort, Pandora forced herself to breathe deeply, pulling the wild energy back inside her, swallowing it back into the void within her heart. The violent purple-black flames that had enveloped her flickered and then slowly disappeared, leaving only the faintest trace of energy in the air. Pandora looked at Leon and noticed the burns on his hand, the one closest to her. I hurt him, she realized with a pang of guilt. But just as soon as she felt it, the guilt was swallowed by the ever-consuming void of chaos within her, leaving her feeling cold and detached once more. Leon's expression softened, though confusion still lingered in his eyes. He flexed his burned hand slightly, but there was no sign of anger, only concern. Pandora, what was that? What did you just do? I couldn't feel anything from you, but it was intense. Are you okay? Pandora turned away from him, her gaze landing on the large holographic display in the distance. She was silent, unsure of how to explain the chaos inside her, the power she barely understood herself. Her eyes locked onto the projection as the scene changed to a new perspective. A news camera zoomed in on a scene that made her heart drop. The once thriving forest she had known her entire life was now in ruins. Trees were reduced to charred remains, the earth was scorched and split open, and smoke billowed from several places. The destruction was unlike anything Pandora had ever seen, and her stomach twisted as she realized the level of devastation that the battle had caused. This was no ordinary fight. Her breath caught in her throat as the camera zoomed in on a familiar figure, her father, Elias Grun. Blood trickled from his forehead, and his arm hung limply at his side, clearly broken. Yet he stood defiantly in the air, surrounded by a swirling tempest of fire and lightning. In his hand, he held a sword made entirely of flames, crackling with barely contained energy. Around him, lightning snapped and sparked, making it clear he wasn't ready to give up. Pandora's eyes widened as she watched a laser beam streak toward him, only to be deflected by an invisible shield. It wasn't just fire and lightning, her father was using multiple abilities, switching between them with ease. He raised his hand, and the energy of the laser was reflected away, slicing through the remains of a tree. Pandora barely noticed the hero who fired the laser, focusing solely on her father. He looked tired but resolute, facing down multiple S-rank heroes without backing down. The sheer power on display made her realize just how much destruction a battle between such strong abilities could cause. She had never seen her father like this, pushed to his limits but still standing firm. As the camera cut to another angle, Pandora caught a glimpse of the hero responsible for the laser. His eyes and hands glowed with the deadly energy, and he fired another shot toward her father, who deflected it once more. Pandora's heart raced. This is because of me, she thought, her emotions swirling in a storm of guilt and fear. They're after him because of me. Leon's voice brought her back to the present. Pandora, talk to me, he urged, stepping closer again. What's going on? You don't have to carry this alone. But Pandora couldn't find the words to explain. Her gaze remained fixed on the display, watching helplessly as the battle raged on. What have I done?
Go.
Pandora watched as her father was suddenly attacked from behind by a hero. For a moment, it seemed like the attack would be fatal, but her father broke free, throwing his assailant back with a surge of strength. The battle intensified with every second, becoming so fast that Pandora was sure only she could still follow what was happening. Her father's movements were precise, driven by an unwavering will to survive. The flame of determination burned brightly in his eyes, and Pandora could feel her own feelings shifting. The guilt she had carried, the anger she had harbored toward humanity, started to fade. The emotions were still there, but their weight on her was no longer as crushing as before. Yet, deep down, she knew it wasn't over, not even close. Something within her stirred, a chaotic force responding to her shifting emotions. Her hair began to float, and around her, purple lightning crackled with a life of its own. Leon noticed the energy flickering around Pandora, instantly recognizing it as something unnatural, something chaotic. He couldn't quite grasp what it was, but there was no other explanation. This must be chaos itself. It was the only way he could explain why the violet energy seemed to evade his senses entirely. At first, he thought Pandora might possess two distinct abilities, one that allowed her to cloak her powers and another that manifested as these purple flashes. It made more sense to him than the idea of someone being able to control chaos itself. Still, whatever it was, he felt he needed to calm her down, to suppress her powers before something went wrong. But as he stepped closer, his hand reddened as if scorched by fire, a sharp pain shooting through him. He pulled back, startled, and it was then he realized there could be no other explanation. It was chaos. Pandora's eyes snapped open, wide with surprise, as the camera filming the scene was suddenly grabbed by an invisible force and thrown into a wild spin, the image blurring. Leon froze, stepping back as the dangerous, crackling energy around her weakened. But it felt different now. The chaos had shifted, as if its influence on him had faded. It no longer seemed to affect him directly. "My little star, remember my stories, survive." Elias's voice rang out, laced with barely suppressed rage. But it wasn't just anger, there was pain in his voice, too, a deep, gut-wrenching pain that pierced Pandora's heart. Her chest felt hollow, empty. Inside her, the chaos loosened, swirling like a violet flame dancing in a dark room. But as she focused more closely, she realized that her ability to see things was shifting too. The flickering light wasn't just a flame, it was more, it was a black and violet sun, pulsing within her. With a sharp snap, the image of the sun shattered, sending a shock through Pandora. She flinched, lost, not knowing what to do. Pandora felt numb, lost. The world around her seemed drained of color, devoid of life. What do I even want anymore? She thought, her mind spiraling. This emptiness inside me, it's unbearable. I want them, the ones who made me feel this, to suffer the same emptiness. They should lose everything. I want to take everything from them. Then, maybe they'll understand what it's like to have nothing. A soft, violet light began to glow, reflecting off the windows of the towering buildings around her. People looked up, puzzled, but saw nothing out of the ordinary, just a strange light that seemed to reflect at odd angles. The light embodied a bizarre beauty, a sight that left many speechless. "What is that?" a bearded man asked a blonde woman beside him. "That doesn't look like any superpower," someone else commented, rubbing their bald head in confusion. "Is it magic?" a child asked, his voice filled with awe. The light grew brighter, casting an eerie, mist-like glow in the air. It was stunning, but the people didn't have long to wonder. Their thoughts were interrupted by a blaring alarm. "Attention, 2 high-speed entities are approaching the city, please proceed to the bunkers immediately." The alarm echoed through the entire city, sending waves of panic through the crowd. Pandora blinked as the holographic signs around her flashed red and started blinking, signaling the city's transition to battle mode. Pandora heard a loud rushing sound approaching from above. The chaos in her body stilled, and the purple light that had surrounded her vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Leon spoke to her, grabbing her by the arm. He flinched slightly, his hand reddened, almost like he'd been sunburned. Without hesitation, Pandora followed him. He said something else as frost formed beneath their feet, cold air swirling around them. Pandora saw the people running, frantic, their movements surreal. It all felt detached, as though none of this had anything to do with her. Someone was talking, but she couldn't understand the words. Tears streaked her face, though she didn't know why. Her legs moved, but she had no idea where they were taking her. Explosions tore through the chaos, and the panic around her escalated. Pandora's vision sharpened. She could see the glimmer of countless powers in the people around her, shining like small beacons. Roughly a quarter of those nearby seemed to possess some kind of ability. She realized, with growing curiosity, that these powers felt tangible, as though they were within her reach. As they ducked into a darkened room, Pandora felt her exhaustion wash over her like a tidal wave. She barely had time to think about lying down before she collapsed into someone's waiting arms. The first thing Pandora noticed as she slowly woke was how strangely complete her power felt now. The formless, shifting sensation that had once filled her was gone, replaced by something far more solid. It felt like she had finally unlocked a part of herself. As her father had once told her, she could now sense the core of her ability, as if she could reach into her inner world and grasp its essence. It was a power that took something from others and gave it to her. Combined with her newfound ability to see the powers in others, she could come to only one conclusion about her ability. And that conclusion terrified her, even in her half-awake state. As her senses returned, Pandora overheard Leon speaking to another man, explaining that his niece had been overwhelmed by the chaos and stress, so she needed to rest. Wrapped in blankets, Pandora slowly sat up, noticing the heavy scent of sweat and fear that filled the room. She opened her eyes fully and saw Leon speaking with a man who looked just as disheveled and exhausted as he did. The group around her hadn't noticed she was awake yet. Pandora reminded herself that chaos energy was invisible to almost everyone, which meant she was safe for now. No one would discover what kind of power she had, not yet. As she moved to stand, she felt the ground beneath her shift slightly, accompanied by a soft, comforting whine. Only then did Pandora realize she hadn't been sleeping on a mattress but on Lola. The massive wolfhound's presence in the bunker must have been tolerated only because her powers made her seem harmless or even cute to others. As Lola stirred, Leon turned to see Pandora awake. He smiled, relief evident on his face, and hurried over, asking if she was all right. His concern was genuine. Pandora nodded, assuring him she was fine. She didn't mention the unsettling changes she had felt within herself. Instead, she accepted the bottle of water offered to her, drinking it down as Leon's companion, a bearded man with dark hair and brown eyes, commented on how hard she must have been hit during the attack to have slept so long. Yeah, the stress was overwhelming, Pandora replied, her gaze flickering to the faint, bluish shimmer of the man's power. It was a low-tier ability, E rank at best. Pandora considered stealing it, but now wasn't the time. She didn't know if she could do it discreetly, or even how the process would work. Better to wait. Without warning, a large tongue swept across her face, startling her. It was Lola, now fully awake and joyfully licking her in greeting. Pandora blinked in surprise, her attention drawn to something else. Lola had 3 distinct powers. It wasn't uncommon for monsters to have multiple abilities, but their lack of intelligence made them easier targets. Pandora thought it might be simpler to steal powers from creatures in the chaotic zones. Pandora turned around, searching for Leon, but he was nowhere to be found. She realized that she must have lost him in the crowd. Blinking, Pandora felt a sense of disorientation. The crowd had dragged her somewhere unfamiliar. In the distance, she spotted a majestic building perched on a hill, overlooking a vast estate. It was the Helios Academy, a massive structure built from glass and gold, gleaming in the fading sunlight. Pandora stopped in her tracks, her thoughts eerily calm, given the fact that she had just recently lost her parents. At least, she assumed her mother was dead as well, although she had no proof yet. The wind swept through the city, carrying with it the scent of fresh blood and ash. Around her, the heroes worked tirelessly, trying to help those trapped or wounded in the aftermath of the chaos. Yet all the destruction felt strangely distant to her, as if it was happening in another world. Well, what's a lonely girl like you doing here all by herself? A voice interrupted her thoughts. Pandora looked up to see a man with skin that appeared to be a strange mix of gray and brown. He was large and muscular, and slung over his shoulder was a massive I-beam, a clear indication of his strength. His imposing presence made her hesitate, taking a cautious step back. Don't worry, I'm not here to harm you. Relax, the man said with a calm voice. You seem lost. Can I help you? Pandora hesitated, unsure if she could trust this stranger. His superpower felt unclear and blurry to her, almost as if it were hidden behind a fog. She remained silent, her eyes fixed on him, scrutinizing every movement. The man set down the metal beam, his muscles rippling as he did so, and rested his head on his hands, studying her carefully. Not much of a talker, huh? That's all right, he said with a gentle smile. Pandora remained quiet, thinking through her options. She took a small, tentative step toward him, intrigued by his power. He watched her closely, sensing her caution, and refrained from speaking further, worried that any sudden action might scare her off. She moved closer, until she was within arm's reach of him, her fingers almost brushing against his abs. As she stretched out her hand, her eyes darted to the now empty street, making sure no one was watching. When her fingertip touched his skin, a jolt seemed to pass from her into him, like a thread of energy pulling something from deep within. The man blinked, stunned, as a vision flickered before his inner eye. He saw a massive, glowing purple eye, hovering in what felt like his innermost being. The eye stared down at his superpower, inspecting it as though it were prey. As the touch ended, the D-rank hero felt like he had just barely escaped death. For a moment, he didn't understand what had happened. It seemed too surreal. He had never glimpsed his inner world or his powers like this before. He shook his head, dismissing the experience as some kind of illusion, and refocused on the present. "What's your name, kid?" the giant man asked gently, sensing that she had been through something rough, given the way she interacted with people. "My name is Pandora," she whispered, then added softly that she had lost her grandfather in the crowd. The hero offered to help her find him, but Pandora remained undecided. She turned and walked away without answering, leaving the hero standing there with mixed feelings. As she walked through the city, Pandora felt lost. She had no money, no place to stay, and no idea what to do next. The day passed in a blur of events, and soon, the two suns began to set. The shadows stretched longer, and the sky darkened. For 5 brief minutes, the world was enveloped in darkness, until the moon rose, bathing everything in a silvery glow. The city now looked almost ethereal, as if caught in some kind of dream. Pandora leaned against a stone wall, deep in thought about her next move and where she would sleep.
Dora leaned against the cold brick wall of an alleyway, her eyes scanning the quiet streets of Metropole Alpha. The once bustling metropolis was now eerily still, save for the distant hum of helicopters and the occasional wail of a siren. She pulled her jacket tighter around her, the cool evening air biting at her skin. The city had returned to a semblance of normalcy after the chaos of the recent battle, but Pandora could still feel the weight of destruction lingering in the air, like a heavy cloud that refused to dissipate. What am I going to do? She thought, her mind racing through possibilities. She didn't have a place to stay, and with Leon nowhere to be found, her options were limited. She needed somewhere quiet, somewhere warm, and above all, somewhere windless. As she stood in the alley, feeling the wind whip through the narrow street, she knew she couldn't sleep out here. The nights were getting colder, and winter was fast approaching. Maybe I could find a place like an orphanage, she mused, half hoping, half doubting. But would they really let someone like me stay for the night without asking too many questions? Her thoughts drifted as she considered the practicality of it all. She had no money, no identification, and no reason to believe anyone would offer her a bed out of pure kindness. Still, it was worth a try. Pandora's senses sharpened as she stood there, thinking of her next move. Where's the nearest orphanage? She wondered, trying to recall if she had passed one earlier. She wrinkled her nose in concentration, then thought, if it's this late, maybe I can smell dinner. Orphanages usually have simple meals, right? She sniffed the air, letting her heightened sense of smell take over. At first, all she could detect were the usual city smells, rotting garbage, car exhaust, and the faint, burnt odor of machinery still running in the distance. But then, something more pleasant caught her attention, the distinct smell of freshly baked bread. Her stomach growled, and she focused on the scent. It was faint but distinct, pulling her in a certain direction. She followed it, winding through the streets as the smell came and went, her pace quickening each time she caught a stronger whiff of it. A gust of wind snatched the scent away for a moment, making her pause. But as soon as it returned, she was back on the trail, determined. Finally, she arrived at a building that looked like it had stood for at least a century. It was an old stone structure with a red-tiled roof, weathered but well-maintained. It stood out against the futuristic, gleaming towers of the city center, its vintage charm a relic from another era. Despite its age, the building seemed warm and welcoming, as if it had been lovingly cared for over the years. Pandora approached the window and peered inside. Through the glass, she could see several children gathered around a large wooden table, eating their evening meal. There was a gentle hum of conversation as they shared food and laughter. At the head of the table stood a woman, tall, with long black hair and piercing red eyes. She was overseeing the meal, her movements calm and practiced as she laid down the last dish. Just as Pandora was about to turn away, the woman's gaze snapped toward her. It was a brief moment, but the intensity in the woman's eyes made Pandora freeze.
Pandora's gaze met that of the tall woman inside the orphanage. Something stirred within her. The woman's red eyes locked onto hers for a brief moment before she disappeared from view.
Pandora stayed still, half hidden in the shadows, waiting. The sound of footsteps echoed down the empty street, steady and purposeful. Soon, the woman emerged from the door, her tall figure commanding attention as she walked toward Pandora. Each of her steps resonated through the quiet streets, cutting through the distant hum of sirens and helicopters that still lingered after the chaos. The devastation was fresh, yet Pandora noticed how the people here continued with their lives as though destruction was routine. It unsettled her. Humans are strange, she thought. They adapt so quickly to chaos, as if they expect it. The woman stopped in front of Pandora, her voice gentle but firm. "Are you lost?" she asked, eyes filled with concern. "You look like you could use a place to sleep." Pandora hesitated, her mind racing as she crafted a story. She needed to be cautious but convincing. I lost my grandfather," she said softly, lowering her gaze to seem more vulnerable. "He brought me to this city, but now I don't know where he is. I don't know what to do." The woman's expression softened even more. "That sounds hard. Come inside. We have space, and it's warmer than out here." Pandora blinked, surprised at the immediate offer. No probing questions, no suspicion. Just pure, unwarranted kindness. It made her uneasy, but she nodded and followed the woman inside. As they climbed the stone steps, Pandora's thoughts grew darker. "Why is she so kind to me?" she wondered. "I hate her. I hate them all. The humans took my father from me." Her jaw clenched as the memory of her father's death surfaced. She had felt it, his essence had faded completely, leaving her hollow. He was gone, and nothing could bring him back. This act of kindness from the woman meant nothing to Pandora. It was a bitter reminder of everything she had lost. As they stepped into the warm interior of the orphanage, Pandora's senses were overwhelmed by the scent of food and the soft chatter of children. The woman gestured for her to enter further. Pandora felt a strange sense of disconnect. Is this real? The woman offered her food without even asking if she had money or identification. The children accepted her presence with smiles, as if she belonged among them. But I don't belong here, Pandora thought. This isn't my world. Her sharp gaze swept across the room, and then she saw it, the glimmer inside 3 of the children. They didn't know it yet, but Pandora could see the abilities slumbering within them. They were not visible to the naked eye, rather, Pandora could sense the faint glow of these latent powers deep within their beings. One boy, perhaps around 14, had a flicker inside him, a bright, fiery energy. His power must be connected to fire, Pandora deduced. Another child, a girl sitting across from him, had a softer, greenish glow, something soothing and nurturing. She must have some sort of healing ability, Pandora thought. The third child, much younger, had a spark of energy that pulsed like lightning inside him. Pandora's fingers twitched at the possibilities. They have no idea they possess these powers, she realized, feeling a cold satisfaction. If they didn't know about their abilities, taking them would be easy. She just had to find the right moment, a subtle opportunity. But for now, she kept her intentions hidden behind a mask of indifference. The woman, who had introduced herself as Veal, brought Pandora a plate of food. It was a simple meal, beetroot soup. Pandora stared at it for a moment before lifting the spoon to her mouth. As the warm, earthy flavors spread across her tongue, a sharp pang of sorrow struck her chest. The taste reminded her of her mother, Serafina, and the pumpkin soup she used to make. It was unbearable, this reminder of a time that felt so distant. Her father was dead, and she didn't know if her mother had survived. The weight of that uncertainty pressed on her like a stone. She lowered the spoon, her appetite fading as her mind clouded with grief. The warmth and kindness in this place only made her feel more out of place. This isn't where I belong, Pandora thought again, glancing toward the children. They seemed happy, blissfully unaware of the cruelty of the world outside. It irritated her, but she also felt a sliver of confusion. Why did these children, these humans, feel so innocent, so untouched by the horrors of the world?
And that's all for this video. I hope you liked it. If you want to hear more of this story, let me know by liking and subscribing. And if you look to the left of the screen, you'll see the link to the latest video I uploaded. If you click on the right side of the screen, You'll now also get to the playlist, and at the top center of the screen, you can see my YouTube channel where you can listen to all my stories. I hope to see you again in the next video. Until next time, goodbye.